Sharks glide in the vast blue wilderness like echoes of a prehistoric past. Silent, precise, and vital. Neither reckless killers nor mindless beasts. They are the ocean's guardians, maintaining balance with every move. Their senses can detect the faintest heartbeat, their speed unmatched, and their presence essential. Yet their greatest threat isn't nature. It's us. Centuries of fear have turned them into villains, but without sharks, the ocean crumbles. They are not symbols of terror, but of survival. The real danger isn't in their presence, it's in a future without them. Here are 6 stories. In 2013, the coastal city of Sochi, Russia, was known for its picturesque beaches and as a hub for marine attractions. The Sochi Seaside Park had long been a popular destination, drawing thousands of visitors eager to witness breathtaking performances by orcas and their trainers. Anastasia Miller, a 29-year-old orca trainer, had worked at the park for nearly a decade. She had a special bond with a male orca named Cairo, having spent years training and performing with him. The two had built a relationship of trust, making what happened on that fateful afternoon all the more shocking. The performance arena was packed with spectators as Anastasia stepped onto the platform. The air smelled of salt and fish, and the water shimmered under the bright overhead lights. Cairo surfaced, his massive black and white frame breaking through the pool's surface. He was one of the park's most prized attractions, imposing, intelligent, and seemingly gentle. That day, however, something felt different. Trainers who had worked alongside Anastasia noticed Cairo's unusual behavior. He hesitated on commands, swam in tight, erratic circles, and slapped his tail against the water more aggressively than usual. It was subtle, but seasoned trainers knew that such behavior could be a warning. Anastasia, ever confident in her bond with Cairo, pressed on with the routine. As she signaled for a deep dive, Cairo did not immediately respond. He lingered at the surface, his dark eyes fixed on Anastasia. Then in an instant he lunged. His massive jaws clamped around her arm, and with terrifying force he yanked her into the water. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Some initially thought it was part of the act, but the panic in the trainers' voices made it clear. Something had gone terribly wrong. The other trainers sprang into action, slapping the water's surface and shouting commands in an attempt to distract Cairo. He ignored them, dragging Anastasia deeper, thrashing violently as he held her beneath the surface. Bubbles churned wildly, distorting the horrific struggle happening below. Minutes passed like an eternity. Then finally, Cairo released his grip. Anastasia floated to the surface, motionless. Trainers rushed to pull her from the water. Blood seeped from deep wounds along her torso and arm, the result of Cairo's crushing bite. Emergency responders were already waiting at the edge of the pool, having been called the moment the attack began. They worked frantically to stabilize her as they rushed her to the nearest hospital. Despite their efforts, Anastasia succumbed to her injuries within hours. The attack sent shockwaves through the park and beyond. Those who had known her were devastated, struggling to comprehend why Cairo, an animal she had trusted for years, had suddenly turned on her. Speculation ran rampant. Experts debated whether stress, captivity, or a suppressed predatory instinct had triggered the attack. Some pointed to the psychological toll captivity took on orcas, arguing that the incident was yet another tragic consequence of keeping such intelligent creatures confined. Others insisted it was an isolated event, a tragic accident that could not have been foreseen. In the aftermath, the marine park faced intense scrutiny. Animal rights activists renewed calls for an end to orca captivity, using Anastasia's story as a rallying cry. Trainers became more cautious, but the reality lingered. No amount of training could ever truly predict the behavior of a wild animal, no matter how long it had been in captivity. Cairo remained at the park, but he was no longer used in performances. He spent his days swimming alone in his enclosure, his future uncertain. Anastasia's colleagues mourned her loss, knowing she had dedicated her life to these creatures, only to become another reminder of their unpredictable nature. Her story became one of the many cautionary tales that underscored the complexities of human interaction with captive orcas. And for those who had witnessed the attack that day, the image of Cairo's sudden turn, the thrashing water, and the desperate struggle would never fade from memory. Over the following months, the marine park's attendance declined sharply. People who once marveled at the spectacle of orcas performing tricks in confined spaces now saw them in a different light. Parents hesitated before bringing their children, and protesters frequently gathered outside the park, holding signs depicting images of captive orcas alongside grim statistics about the dangers of their captivity. The management tried to restore confidence, assuring the public that new safety measures were being implemented, but the incident had left a permanent scar on the park's reputation. Some of Anastasia's colleagues left the profession entirely, unable to shake the horror of what they had seen. Others stayed but were more cautious, knowing they were always one moment away from tragedy. The training routines were adjusted, incorporating more safeguards, but many questioned whether any precautions would ever be enough. The attack had proven in the most harrowing way possible that nature was never fully predictable, no matter how much humans tried to control it. Anastasia's family, devastated by her loss, fought for changes in the industry. Her parents, once proud of her career, now campaigned for better regulations in marine parks worldwide. They spoke at conferences, attended hearings, and met with activists, determined that no other family should have to endure what they had. Their efforts contributed to a growing movement calling for an end to orca captivity, adding more voices to the chorus demanding change. Meanwhile, Cairo, isolated in his enclosure, became a symbol of the debate. Some saw him as a dangerous, unpredictable predator, while others viewed him as a victim of captivity, a creature pushed beyond its limits. The marine park staff, unsure of what to do, debated whether he should be relocated to a sanctuary or remain at the facility under stricter monitoring. In the end, he remained in his tank, swimming in endless circles, a living reminder of the risks involved in keeping wild animals in confinement. As the years passed, the marine park gradually faded from public interest, replaced by newer attractions and different controversies. But for those who had been there that day, for the trainers, the spectators, and Anastasia's family, the memory of the attack never lost its grip. It was a reminder of the fine line between human ambition and nature's raw, uncontainable force, a cautionary tale of trust misplaced, and a tragedy that no one would ever forget. The sun hung high over the vast expanse of the Coral Sea as Luca Rossi prepared for his dive. It was December 2018, and the waters off the coast of Queensland, Australia, shimmered under the midday light. The Great Barrier Reef, a sprawling underwater paradise, stretched beneath the waves, its vibrant coral formations teeming with marine life. Luca, a seasoned scuba diver from Italy, had spent years exploring the ocean, but nothing could have prepared him for the nightmare that awaited him that afternoon. Luca was part of a small group of divers on a guided excursion, led by an experienced local dive instructor. Their destination was a reef known as Osprey Reef, an isolated atoll renowned for its dramatic drop-offs and rich biodiversity. The group descended into the crystal-clear waters, drifting weightlessly as schools of fish darted through the coral. It was the kind of dive Luca lived for, tranquil, immersive, and breathtakingly beautiful. As the group moved along the reef wall, a tiger shark emerged from the blue. At first, it was nothing unusual. Tiger sharks were common in these waters, and encounters were part of the diving experience. The shark, measuring nearly 4 meters in length, cruised by at a distance, its striped body gliding effortlessly through the current. Luca noted its presence but remained calm. He had encountered sharks before, and as long as they were given space, they rarely posed a threat. But something was different this time. The shark's movements were more deliberate, its eyes locked onto Luca with an intensity that sent a chill through him. It turned sharply, closing the distance between them. The other divers took notice, exchanging uneasy glances. The instructor signaled for everyone to remain calm and stay together, but Luca could feel his pulse quicken. The shark was no longer a passive observer. It was investigating, and its curiosity was turning into something more sinister. Then, without warning, the shark lunged. Luca barely had time to react before he felt the crushing force of its jaws clamping onto his leg. A surge of pain shot through him as the teeth sliced through his wetsuit and into flesh. The water around him turned red, the sight of his own blood sending a wave of panic through his body. He thrashed, instinctively trying to pull free, but the shark's grip was unrelenting. The other diver sprang into action. The instructor struck at the shark with his spear, aiming to startle it into releasing Luca. Another diver swam toward Luca, grabbing his arm and trying to pull him away. The shark jerked its head, dragging Luca downward. His regulator slipped from his mouth, and for a brief, terrifying moment he felt the overwhelming pressure of the deep closing in. Then, as suddenly as it had attacked, the shark let go. The instructor's strikes had done enough to break its hold, and it swam off into the blue, disappearing as swiftly as it had arrived. Luca's companions wasted no time. 2 divers secured him, kicking hard toward the surface, while another deployed an emergency buoy to signal the boat. Breaking through the waves, they shouted for help. The dive boat crew sprang into action, hauling Luca aboard and immediately applying pressure to his mangled leg. His wetsuit was shredded, and blood pooled around him on the deck. A tourniquet was tied hastily as the boat sped toward the nearest medical facility, radioing ahead for emergency responders. Luca drifted in and out of consciousness, his body weak from blood loss. The pain was excruciating, but he clung to the voices around him, the reassuring hands working to keep him alive. He could hear the urgency in their voices, the tension thick in the air. Every minute mattered. Despite their best efforts, the crew knew time was running out. The nearest medical facility was still miles away, and Luca's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His breathing became shallow, his skin pale from the loss of blood. The divers around him did everything they could to stabilize him, but there was only so much they could do out at sea. The reality of the situation was setting in. Luca was slipping away. By the time they reached the hospital, Luca had lost too much blood. Despite the medical team's frantic efforts, his injuries were too severe. He was rushed into surgery, but the damage was irreparable. Within hours of the attack, Luca succumbed to his wounds, his body unable to recover from the trauma. The news of the attack spread quickly. The diving community was shaken, a stark reminder that even experienced divers were not immune to the ocean's unpredictability. The attack reignited debates about the presence of sharks in popular dive spots, with some calling for increased safety measures, while others defended the necessity of preserving the natural balance of marine ecosystems. In the wake of Luca's passing, marine conservationists emphasized the importance of understanding shark behavior rather than fearing it. Though his death was tragic, it sparked renewed discussions about how humans and marine predators coexist. Some advocated for better education on shark encounters, while others stressed the need for improved emergency response protocols for divers in remote locations. Luca's passing left a deep impact on those who knew him. His friends and family mourned the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to exploring and respecting the ocean. Fellow divers paid tribute to him, honoring his passion and bravery. Though he did not survive, his story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of both the beauty and the danger that lie beneath the waves. Tyler Grayson had always felt at home on the water. An avid kayaker, he often paddled along the rugged coastline of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where the Atlantic stretched endlessly into the horizon. The area, once known primarily for its whaling history and charming seaside towns, had become famous in recent years for another reason: the growing presence of great white sharks. Marine biologists attributed the increase to the booming seal population, a natural food source for the apex predators. Tyler had read the warnings, heard the stories, but he never imagined he'd come face to face with one. It was a warm August afternoon in 2021 when Tyler set out from a quiet beach near Chatham. The water was calm, the sky a brilliant blue. He paddled past bobbing buoys and scattered lobster traps, relishing the solitude. A mile offshore, he paused to take in the view, letting the gentle waves rock his kayak. Then, without warning, a violent jolt sent shockwaves through his body. The kayak lurched sideways, nearly capsizing. Tyler barely had time to register what was happening when he saw it: a massive dorsal fin cutting through the water. The great white shark had struck from below, its powerful jaws clamping onto the hull of his kayak. The impact sent an ear-splitting crack through the air as the thick plastic split under the force. Tyler's heart pounded as adrenaline flooded his system. He knew he had to stay calm, but the sight of the enormous predator circling him made it nearly impossible. The shark released its grip and disappeared beneath the surface, leaving Tyler momentarily frozen in disbelief. Before he could react, the shark struck again, this time with even more force. The kayak buckled, water rushing in through the punctured hull. The next thing Tyler knew, he was in the ocean. The sudden chill of the water sent a shock through his system. Instinctively, he kicked hard, his eyes scanning the depths below. He could see the shadow moving beneath him, circling like a ghost in the deep. Panic clawed at his mind, but Tyler forced himself to think. He knew splashing wildly would only draw the shark's attention. Instead, he floated as still as possible, his breaths quick and shallow. The shark came closer, its massive form gliding effortlessly through the water. It passed just feet from him, its black eyes unreadable. Tyler braced himself, expecting another attack, but the shark veered away at the last moment, disappearing into the murky depths. He knew he had to get out of the water, fast. His kayak, now half submerged, was useless. Scanning the horizon, he spotted a fishing boat in the distance. Summoning every ounce of strength, he began to swim toward it. Each stroke felt agonizingly slow, the weight of fear pressing on his chest. Behind him, he imagined the shark lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The boat, a small trawler, had seen the commotion. As Tyler neared, he heard the muffled shouts of the crew. A rope was tossed overboard, and with a final burst of energy, he grabbed hold of it. Strong hands hauled him onto the deck, where he collapsed in exhaustion. His body trembled, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The fishermen stared at him, their faces pale. One of them pointed toward the water, and Tyler followed his gaze. The great white was still there, circling the wreckage of his kayak, its powerful tail sending ripples across the surface. For what felt like an eternity, they watched as the predator inspected the debris before finally vanishing into the deep. Tyler exhaled shakily, realizing just how close he had come to death. The fishermen wrapped him in a blanket, offering him water as they headed back to shore. His mind replayed every terrifying second of the encounter, the sheer power of the shark imprinted in his memory. Back on land, news of the attack spread quickly. Tyler found himself at the center of a media frenzy, reporters eager to hear his story. Some called it a miracle, others a rare but sobering reminder of the ocean's untamed nature. Marine experts analyzed the attack, debating whether the shark had mistaken the kayak for prey or was simply investigating its surroundings. Regardless of the reason, one thing was clear. Humans were visitors in the shark's domain, and sometimes those visits came with consequences. In the weeks that followed, Tyler struggled with lingering fear. The ocean, once his sanctuary, now felt unpredictable, dangerous. Yet deep down, he knew he couldn't stay away forever. With time, he returned to the water, more cautious, more respectful, but still drawn to the vast, unknowable world beneath the waves. His encounter had changed him, a stark reminder of nature's power and the thin line between awe and terror. Even months later, Tyler found himself reliving the attack in nightmares. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the jolt of the kayak, heard the deep, hollow thud of the shark's bite. Therapy helped, but the fear remained, lingering beneath the surface like the predator itself. The sight of open water made his pulse quicken, and he had to remind himself that the ocean was not out to get him. It simply existed, following its own ancient laws. One evening, he sat on the shore, watching the waves roll in. A pod of seals played near the rocks, their sleek bodies moving effortlessly through the surf. Somewhere beyond them, he knew, the sharks patrolled. He understood now. This was their world first. And though he had survived that day, he would never forget the lesson the sea had taught him. Respect, not fear, was the only way forward. Raul Mendoza, a seasoned fisherman from Playa del Carmen, Mexico, had spent his life fishing in the Caribbean Sea. On an early morning in 2019, Raul set out in his small boat, accompanied by his longtime friend and fellow fisherman Diego. They anchored near a remote reef known for its abundant marine life, but also frequented by bull sharks. As they checked their nets, Raul leaned over the side of the boat to inspect his catch. Suddenly, without warning, a bull shark surged from the depths, clamping down on Raul's leg. Diego screamed and desperately tried to pull Raul back into the boat, but the shark's powerful grip dragged Raul underwater. Despite Diego's frantic attempts to rescue him, Raul was fatally injured. His body was recovered later that day. The attack left the local community in shock, as even experienced fishermen knew the dangers of the sea, but never expected such a violent encounter. Diego, still trembling with shock, steered the boat back to shore, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The sea, which had given them their livelihood for so many years, had just taken his closest friend. The authorities were called as soon as Diego reached land, and a search team was dispatched to recover Raul's remains. Locals gathered at the docks, their faces filled with grief and disbelief. Some whispered prayers while others stared blankly at the horizon as if expecting Raoul to walk back into town any moment. Word of the attack spread quickly, making headlines in the region. Experts speculated that the shark had likely mistaken Raoul's movements for those of struggling prey. Bull sharks, known for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in both salt and freshwater, had been seen closer to shore in recent years. Theories emerged. Was it climate change pushing sharks into unfamiliar territories? Had overfishing disrupted the natural balance, forcing the predators to seek alternative food sources? No one could say for certain, but one thing was clear. The ocean had become unpredictable even for those who knew it best. Diego, unable to shake the horror of the attack, found himself plagued by nightmares. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Raoul disappearing beneath the water, felt the helplessness of being unable to save him. He avoided the sea for weeks, something he had never done before. The sound of the waves, once a comfort, now felt like a warning. Eventually, he sought solace in the community, speaking with elders who had spent lifetimes on the water. They reminded him of the respect fishermen must always have for the ocean, of the thin line between life and death that they walked every day. Months later, Diego forced himself to return to fishing, though the weight of Raoul's absence never truly faded. He took extra precautions, warning younger fishermen about the risks they often dismissed. He never leaned over the boat's edge carelessly again. The tragedy became a cautionary tale among the local fishing community, reinforcing the lesson that the ocean was never to be underestimated. For Raoul's family, the sea had stolen a father, a husband, a brother. But in their grief, they found solace in knowing he had died doing what he loved. And so the fishermen continued their work, more wary than before, but forever bound to the waters that had shaped their lives. Despite the tragedy, Raoul's story became a subject of debate among marine researchers and local authorities. Some called for stricter regulations on fishing near shark-heavy waters, while others insisted that the risk was an unavoidable part of the trade. Older fishermen recalled stories of encounters from decades past, tales of sharks circling boats for hours, of men barely escaping with their lives. Diego listened to these stories with new ears, understanding now what he had always taken for granted. The ocean was a force beyond human control. One evening, months after the attack, Diego found himself at the dock staring out at the water. He watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the sea. For the first time since that terrible morning, he let himself remember Raoul not as he had last seen him, but as he had always been, laughing, strong, fearless on the water. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with salty air, and made a quiet promise to his old friend. He would continue fishing, but he would never forget the lesson Raoul had unknowingly given him. The sea was both a provider and a taker, and those who sailed upon it had to respect that balance. Diego's return to fishing was not without difficulty. Each time he set out, his mind flashed back to the attack. But with each passing trip, the fear lessened, replaced by cautious respect. He took on an apprentice, a young man named Emiliano, eager to learn but naive to the dangers of the trade. Diego saw himself in the boy and took it upon himself to teach him what Raoul had never had the chance to. He shared everything: how to read the tides, how to predict weather shifts, and most importantly, how to remain vigilant. The loss of his friend had left a scar, but it had also given him purpose. Years later, a plaque was placed at the docks in Raoul's memory. It read, "Raoul Mendoza, a fisherman of the sea, taken by the sea, remembered always." Every time Diego passed it, he nodded in quiet respect. The ocean continued on, indifferent as ever. But those who had lost someone to its depths carried their memories forward. The story of Raoul Mendoza lived on, not just in the plaque, but in the hearts of those who had loved him, in the lessons Diego passed down, and in the waves that whispered his name. Mateo Vargas had spent years studying sharks. As a marine biologist and diver, he had traveled to some of the most shark-infested waters in the world, always seeking to understand these creatures rather than fear them. Isla Guadalupe, a volcanic island off the coast of Mexico, was one of the prime locations for great white shark research, and Mateo had been coming here for years. It was 2021, and he was part of a research expedition to observe the behavior of several tagged great whites. The team had been using a submersible cage for most of their dives, but on this particular afternoon, the water was unusually calm. Encouraged by the conditions, Matteo decided to venture out without the cage. It was not unheard of. Some of the most experienced divers had done it before under controlled conditions. But the ocean was never fully predictable, and Matteo knew that better than anyone. As he descended into the deep blue, he focused on the task at hand, observing the movements of a large female great white they had named Valeria. She had been tagged months prior and had shown signs of unusual behavior, swimming erratically and deviating from her usual hunting patterns. Matteo aimed his camera at her, adjusting for the perfect shot. She was gliding effortlessly through the water, her massive body cutting through the depths with a grace that almost seemed rehearsed. Then something changed. Valeria's posture stiffened, her body turning sharply in his direction. Matteo remained still, knowing that sudden movements could trigger a predatory response. But then, in a moment of terrifying clarity, he realized something was different. Valeria was not simply curious. She was hunting. A sudden burst of movement sent a jolt of adrenaline through Matteo's body. Valeria was charging. He had seen great whites move fast before, but never this fast. He instinctively raised his arm, pushing against her snout as she veered just inches away from his body. The force of her movement sent a wave of bubbles through the water, clouding his vision for a brief moment. His heart pounded in his chest. His instinct screamed at him to ascend, but he knew that surfacing too quickly could be just as dangerous. Instead, he slowly moved toward a nearby rock formation, pressing his back against it to reduce his visibility. His breathing remained slow, controlled. The boat was not far, but at that moment it felt miles away. Valeria circled, her movements slow, deliberate. Matteo had never felt so exposed. His only advantage was his knowledge. He had studied shark behavior long enough to know that sudden movements could invite an attack. He needed to remain calm. But the way she moved, the way she tilted her head ever so slightly, it was as if she was waiting for a mistake. Then, just as suddenly as the aggression had begun, Valeria turned away, disappearing into the blue. Matteo did not trust it. He knew that sharks often retreated only to return when their prey least expected it. He remained pressed against the rock for what felt like an eternity, before slowly beginning his ascent, never taking his eyes off the open water around him. The moment his head broke the surface, he exhaled deeply, his body trembling with adrenaline. The crew pulled him aboard, their faces a mixture of relief and shock. He barely had the strength to remove his gear. He had faced sharks before, but never like this, never this close to death. That night, as the team reviewed the footage, they saw something chilling. Valeria had been tracking him long before he had noticed. Her approach had been deliberate, calculated. It was not random curiosity. It was predation. The experience shook Matteo in a way he had never anticipated. For weeks after, he questioned his place in the water. He had always believed that knowledge and respect were enough to navigate the ocean safely. But now he was not so sure. Sharks were not mindless killers, but they were also not predictable. And that unpredictability was what made them so terrifying. Months later, he returned to Isla Guadalupe, standing at the edge of the boat, staring down at the water. The fear was still there, but so was the fascination. He knew he could never give up the ocean. It was in his blood. But he also knew now, more than ever, that nature did not operate on human terms. And in the end, survival often came down to one simple rule: never assume you are in control. Despite his growing caution, the pull of the ocean remained irresistible. But Matteo had changed. On his next dive, he hesitated longer than usual before entering the water, his fingers tightening around the ladder. The weight of his previous encounter still clung to him, an invisible anchor of doubt. As he submerged, every shadow in the water felt like a potential threat. Every flicker of movement a reminder of how close he had come to becoming prey. His team had noticed the shift in him. He was no longer the same fearless diver who once dismissed danger as a calculated risk. Now he double-checked every piece of equipment, ran scenarios through his mind, and never underestimated the presence of the sharks he had once felt so comfortable with. He still loved them, still respected them, but he no longer felt invincible. A year later, he found himself in front of an audience, recounting his near-fatal encounter at a marine biology conference. As he spoke, he noticed the expressions in the crowd, some filled with awe, others with fear. But more than anything, he saw understanding. Because in the end, those who truly respected the ocean knew the truth. The moment you believe you have mastered it, is the moment it reminds you that you have not. With every subsequent dive, Matteo carried that lesson with him. He had escaped Valeria that day, but he knew that if circumstances had been just slightly different, the story could have ended another way. And as long as he was in the water, he would never forget it. Claire Dubois had spent over a decade working with orcas in a marine park located in the south of France. It was 2015 and she had developed a deep connection with one particular orca, Apollo. He was a massive male, his sleek black and white body moving with an effortless grace through the large tank. Claire had been his primary trainer for 5 years, and their bond was evident to everyone who worked at the facility. Apollo responded well to her commands, followed her lead in performances, and had never exhibited aggression towards her. But orcas, no matter how well trained, were still apex predators. That afternoon, the sun glared down on the clear blue waters of the Orca tank. The stands were packed with spectators eager to see the show. Claire moved into position at the platform, where she was set to perform a synchronized dive with Apollo. The moment she entered the water, she sensed something was off. Apollo was swimming in tight, erratic circles near the edge of the tank, his dorsal fins slicing through the surface with unusual speed. The other trainers on the deck noticed it too. He was more agitated than usual, vocalizing frequently with short bursts of sharp clicks and whistles. Despite her concern, Claire proceeded with the routine, giving Apollo a familiar hand signal. He hesitated. That had never happened before. She repeated the cue, hoping to reassure him, but before she could react, Apollo lunged. A massive force slammed into her, knocking the breath from her lungs. His powerful jaws clamped down on her forearm, dragging her downward with shocking speed. The world above the surface disappeared as she was yanked into the depths of the pool. A rush of icy water filled her ears as she twisted, desperately trying to break free. Her instincts told her not to struggle. She had always taught others that resisting could make things worse, but panic clawed at her mind as the orca's grip tightened. The other trainers reacted instantly. Shouts echoed across the pool, whistles blew frantically, and staff members pounded the water's surface, trying to distract Apollo. The audience gasped, frozen in shock as the spectacle took a horrifying turn. Some parents covered their children's eyes. Others pulled out their phones, unsure whether to film or call for help. Apollo, still holding Claire in his jaws, surged back toward the surface, then dove again. Her lungs burned as she fought to hold her breath. He wasn't simply dragging her, he was thrashing. The force of his movements sent waves crashing against the glass walls of the tank. The seconds stretched into eternity. Claire knew she was running out of air. Then, as suddenly as the attack had begun, Apollo loosened his grip. Claire's body floated upward, her vision dark at the edges. She felt herself being pulled, strong hands gripping her shoulders, hauling her out of the water and onto the deck. She coughed violently, choking on water as the trainers surrounded her. Blood seeped from deep gashes on her arm, staining the wet concrete beneath her. Paramedics rushed in, loading her onto a stretcher while the audience remained in stunned silence. Apollo swam calmly now, as if nothing had happened. His massive frame drifted to the center of the tank, his dorsal fin slicing through the surface. There was no anger in his dark eyes, no sign of remorse or recognition of what had just occurred. Only silence. Claire's nightmares began soon after the attack. In her sleep, she would feel the crushing weight of Apollo's jaws, the suffocating pull of the water as she was dragged down into the abyss. She would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, her pulse hammering in her ears. Therapy helped, but the psychological scars ran deep. The water, once her second home, now filled her with unease. Even standing too close to the tank made her muscles tense involuntarily. She wasn't alone in her struggle. Many trainers who had suffered similar incidents spoke of the same lingering fear, the same uncertainty about what they had once believed was a bond built on trust. The debate surrounding Apollo's actions intensified in the following months. Animal rights activists seized on the attack as further evidence that marine mammals did not belong in captivity. Videos of the incident spread across social media, fueling outrage. Former trainers came forward, sharing stories of other close calls, incidents that had been downplayed or kept quiet. The management resisted the growing pressure, insisting that Apollo's behavior was an anomaly, a one-time event, not an indictment of the industry itself. But Claire knew better. She had worked with Apollo long enough to understand that something inside him had changed. Perhaps something had broken. A year after the attack, Claire made the hardest decision of her life. She left the marine park. The thought of continuing to work in an environment where animals were confined to artificial enclosures became unbearable. She had once believed in the mission, in the idea that these performances educated the public and fostered a love for marine life. But now, she could no longer ignore the truth. These magnificent creatures were prisoners, their instincts dulled by years of captivity, and their spirits slowly eroding within the walls of their tanks. Apollo had tried to tell her, and she had finally listened. Claire dedicated herself to advocacy, joining efforts to push for better conditions for captive marine mammals and, ultimately, their release into sanctuaries. She traveled, spoke at conferences, and worked alongside organizations fighting to end marine animal captivity. Occasionally, she thought about Apollo, still swimming in the same tank, his world unchanged while hers had shifted entirely. And though she knew she would never see him again, she carried his lesson with her always. Wild creatures were never meant to be caged, and some messages could only be delivered in the most painful of ways. Claire was rushed to the hospital, where she underwent surgery for the severe wounds to her arm. The doctors told her she was lucky. The bite had narrowly missed a major artery. She had survived, but she would never be the same. The attack sent shockwaves through the marine park. Investigations were launched, and experts debated whether Apollo had acted out of stress, aggression, or frustration. Some argued that captivity had taken its toll on him, that years of confinement had built up tension that erupted in that one fateful moment. Others pointed to orcas' unpredictable nature, emphasizing that no amount of training could override their instincts. Claire never returned to the water with Apollo. Her injuries healed, but the trust between them was broken. She continued working at the park, but her role shifted away from performances. She spent more time advocating for changes in how the orcas were managed, pushing for improvements to their care and enrichment. Months later, she stood by the edge of the tank, watching Apollo glide through the water. He seemed calmer now, his previous agitation gone. Yet as she looked into his eyes, she knew the truth. He did not belong there. And perhaps, after all those years, he had finally tried to tell her.